The Goomba is the ultimate enemy. Yes, that's right, this little mushroom-faced menace outclasses the xenomorph from Alien Isolation. You may be thinking, oh well, the alien's quite smart actually, it can adapt to your— No!
How about this? How about this? How about the Goomba shoots you out of the airlock? Pacha!
Oh, but the soldiers in fear can flank—
No! Get flanked by a Goomba.
While studying the vast complexities of enemy AI, I have come to find that none is more impressive than that of the Goomba. When people praise enemy intelligence, it is for the way it engages the player, keeps them on their toes, and accentuates gameplay. But we've all encountered some enemy who remember they left the stove on and suddenly have to retreat while you pick away at their health with no risk or danger. This is because enemies are a collection of smoke and mirrors, and the more complex an enemy, the more potential to exploit their tricks and behaviors. The Goomba does not deal in uncertainty. Its rule is law, its purpose pure. The Jumpman himself, Mario, found his calling by bounding over that very Goomba. That's one small step for Amiya Mario, one giant leap for gaming.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
This is why the Goomba is so supreme. It has a distinct role, guiding the player to both jump, and the potential to interact with jumping, which are echoed throughout the game. It is simple in function, taking up a space, providing danger, and the rules are simple. It moves back and forth, engaging the player to plan their action and timing. Traps and hazards are a good example of this as well. A pool of lava or spike on the wall can be placed as needed and used as a tool to guide the player. Perhaps even more so than our precious Goomba, these static hazards' role and rules are even more clear, and a great place to start when designing enemies. With this room, the player is free to explore, but add some lava, and you can expect the player will traverse through this path. Add some lasers and now there's even more control for verticality. For even more engagement, movement can be added to the lasers, timers for when they fire off, or enable them from detection. Lava can bounce you on hits, so you have to quickly plan your landing and provide emergent gameplay for enemies or objects. It is these same principles and logic that enemies are built upon. But what sets the Goomba apart from the rest? Leonardo da Vinci once said, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." Enemies are built upon a series of reactions and often variability, but with the Goomba, we have only reaction. And these reactions are predictable. It's not based off vague data, but very clear rules such as only switching direction upon collision. With no variability, there is a sense of fairness. You know exactly what to expect. Something simple can have depth and challenge increased by placing them strategically, while still maintaining that sense of fairness. But then why add more variables and reactions to an enemy's behavior? Despite the benefits the Goomba brings to the game, it is still considered one of the weakest base enemies, and the very first one you encounter. As an enemy that does not react nor vary to the player's actions, it appears dull in mind. But when adding reactions to the player, enemies begin to feel smarter. The Hammer Bros come across as far more calculated thinking foes, and the only reaction they do is simply flipping to face Mario. Variation can also amplify this feeling where the hammer tosses and jumps occur at random intervals. Despite these procedures being quite simple, they feel complex as they are designed to counter the player's moveset and increase engagement. There is a balance to this, however, as a satisfying intelligent enemy is not just one that flawlessly counters everything, but has fair flaws and openings. Perfect reactions, and the enemy can seem robotic. Though this does have a place when facing skilled and thematic enemies, an enemy who can fail is far more believable. Too much failure though, and the enemy no longer appears intelligent. If you can cheese an enemy by standing in a certain spot, the illusion shatters. This is why the soldiers in fear and the alien in isolation are so highly regarded. While they can be outplayed, it is often a direct result from the player carefully paying attention and reacting to their actions. So how does one go about building these types of enemies? Well, much like the Goomba, it's actually quite simple. Every enemy is always performing some sort of action. Even when there's nothing happening, you can consider this an idle action. To provide the illusion of thought, all you need is a condition which can then change the action. It is this condition and action relationship, the cause and effect, that creates intelligence in which everything is built upon. If you were in a real fight, there are a wide array of actions to take, but those actions often depend on the conditions. It's not very likely that you would try to swing or kick at someone 50 feet away, but up close this would be a more viable option. So when structuring an enemy's behaviors, this is a good way to process their logic. Though somewhat exploitable at times, FromSoft is generally considered to craft highly engaging enemies, and this type of thinking is often at the core of their behaviors. They will have a list of possible actions that they can pick when under certain conditions, and a majority of the time, this is simple as a distance check. Having multiple actions to select adds some realistic engagement, as similar to a real fight, you won't always know for sure what strike your opponent may choose. For this random selection, each action has an associated weight, which determines how likely it is to be chosen. Once an action goal is chosen, there are possible sub-goal procedures, like closing the gap before a strike. While most games vary in their behavior structure, at their core, they are still built around this condition and action relationship. When building my own behavior system, I approached it from the perspective of how I expect one would think and react, with decision-making periods and structured around data to make actions reusable and modular without having to add any extra code. The decision-making process is quite simple yet important. As similar to the Goomba, you want the enemy to engage with a certain aspect of the player. And with this in mind, a few condition and action pairings can create an enemy that seems calculated and intimidating. I call these condition and action pairings behavior sets, where the enemy will check that condition which, if true, will perform the associated action. If that condition is not true, it will check the next behavior set. This is a very light operation, as it only runs periodically, as once the behavior is selected, it will signal a behavior is in progress and not need to check again. To not overload the behavior system, more common procedures and reactions are built into the enemy through generic stats. For example, blocking or parrying are reactive and do not need to be a selected behavior, as they can have their chance and speed as presets. These are still condition and action relationships, but it's important to delegate basic procedures, reactions, and actions where they best fit. Basic procedures such as navigation and movement tactics can also be built into the enemy. A behavior set could change this, but an enemy should still be able to function without any decision making, much like a Goomba. There was an earlier version of this behavior system shown in the previous combat video, but actions were not as modular as they could be, with movements separated from attacks, and attacks getting a bit too bloated with sub-goals and sub-actions like gap closing. I instead refactored the actions to be a single slot, and they can be very basic or extended into more complex forms of data. A basic action plays an animation with the possibility to spawn a prefab, change a variable, or generate movement on an animation event. Even the base action has a lot of possibilities and can cover most types of spellcasting or range attacks, as extra data is on the spawned object. Attack actions extend this and provide data for when the collision occurs, and movement actions have their associated movement tactic and early stopping conditions. Before, this used to work similar to FromSoft's, where an attack might have a movement sub-goal, but I felt it was more versatile to separate these sub-goals into their own independent actions, and the intended follow-up can then be slotted in if it's meant to be a combo. What's great is that these can be extended to even more complex layering like shooting, guarding, or attacking while moving, and other special behaviors. For me at least, this setup is more natural, versatile, and easier to follow than standard GOAP or behavior tree setups, but still works in a similar manner. And since we are working through data rather than code, these can be shared between enemies and set up through the inspector without any extra scripts. So now that we have the behavior system set up, the next step is making the actions. As we may be making some completely new behaviors, there may be a bit of procedure handling internally when creating a new action. However, once created, variations are very quick and can be prototyped within seconds. I prefer to use animation events when possible, as this prevents repeated calculations or checks on the enemy script, and only calls the function when needed. Much like the Goomba, I try to think of one action at a time, and what purpose it might serve. An action on its own doesn't have to be the most challenging move, but it should provoke the player into a certain approach. In honor of the Goomba, I first did movement tactics, such as a ranged enemy preferring to maintain a certain distance. This meshed quite well with the existing Void pathfinding, and changing a movement tactic just needs to change the desired direction and whether or not it is strafing. Attacking was quite simple as well, since the actions are animation based, and we can call all associated functions through animation events. As the player has high mobility, while not every enemy will have this, swapping between melee and ranged is great for testing and balance. Sharing these actions is quite simple, as they either have the colliders on the enemy side, or the same projectiles that a turret uses can be used on an enemy, with options to spawn from certain points. Gap closes can up the intensity, with lunges, jumps, and zipping towards you, similar to how you can to them. Teleport dashes will also be utilized for more powerful and spectral foes, with options to teleport behind or in front of you for more anime-styled fights. For actions like blocking, I've placed these as reactive hit procedures. They can be an anticipated action as well, but some enemies will break combos, block at certain angles, or block a whole type entirely to incentivize a different approach. This initial action creation is mostly just to create situational variety, and just like our traps with the Goomba, can be combined for great effect. The upcoming months will continue to focus on this, with actions that force a particular engagement. While I have a ton of ideas for these, if there is something you would like to see, feel free to leave a comment, and I think some community back and forth would be quite fun. As though many of these enemies are quite basic, more elite foes are on the horizon as the action list is expanded. While we have gone over a lot of how enemies dish out damage, there has been a lot of improvements in how they receive hits as well. Testing out a certain gorilla meme was also testing how certain large attacks and weapons could work in high ragdoll environments, as well as applying this to the player when under certain conditions. With the lava and lasers came hazard effects where fire or other types of damage can tick and apply special reactions. For colossal sized enemies, I reworked how the forces and hits worked, as it wasn't in a workflow that was scalable with their varying bone mass. Ragdoll works far better with physical collisions, so I instead spawn an invisible physical object slightly in front of the impact point and shoot it forward. This works amazing for all size enemies and requires no additional setup like the simulated force used to. Another much needed hit feedback was GIB VFX. Weapons had their own associated visuals, and now enemies will emit their own when hit. For a construct, this might be sparks and stone, and for a creature with resin, splashes of glowing yellow. Every attack, whether it be ranged, melee, or otherwise, will have an associated effect type of piercing, burst, or slashes, and can vary in scale based on hit. I also felt like smaller hits such as the pistol could use a bit more impact when chaining frequent hits. I added an internal poise system so a small hit that might only flinch an enemy can stagger and even launch if hit in quick succession. These changes are exactly what was missing for me, and now I'm very satisfied with the hit reactions. Something near on the horizon is interactive takedowns, which will also come in handy not only for small enemies, but also for colossal foes. To prepare for this syncing of player and foe, I decided to flesh out the grab combat, which utilizes the same systems. With Withersworn's large moveset, new inputs are hard to come by, but I'm very happy with how the grab works. It shares the same input as the gap close, but will do a quick sweep check in front of you to see if there are targets within range. If it detects the target is in range, it will attempt to grab, and if not, it will assume you're wanting to gap close. This worked out surprisingly well, and feels very intuitive, especially how it shares similar inputs with other grab and releases like the rope drag. For the grab, there was a difficult decision in keeping it animation based to maintain fidelity, or allowing the enemy to use ragdoll, which would be quite fun and immersive. As the player can move so fast, ragdoll can break under high speeds. As there will still be some goofy ragdoll situations, as that's just in the nature of ragdoll, I managed to get a very nice result by adjusting the bone's max velocity based on the player's speed. That way at low speeds it won't be affected by random collision jumps, and at high speeds will be fast enough to keep up. This has been amazing, as a grab release can vary based on your animation, and it's just really satisfying to walk around with. There are a few grab variations and takedowns I want to do when used at high speeds, and will be something I add over time. While there has been a ton of improvements in level design tools, player controller, IK handling, buffs, gear, and prepping for new melee weapons and more, I will have to save that for another video, as I have some Goombas to make. Thank you for watching, and please remember to subscribe and join any of the socials for more frequent updates. And a special thanks to the Patreon members who helped greatly with Withersworn's development.